Hello again, everyone, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. Good topic, dark one. Let's do it. What's a scary urban legend or a story not many people know about your hometown? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. In the late 1800s or early 1900s, there was a man who murdered his sister and her children, then hung their bodies up in his barn. Apparently, when police looked into it, they found the bodies hanging with wolves, or dogs, can't remember, eating their dangling legs. The man claimed it was his sister's Native American husband who killed them, so the town got together and lynched the husband. People who live in that area claim you can find paw prints on the ground with no evidence of dogs or wolves being there, and that there were voices and cold spots where the barn once stood. We have a big tower in the center of our town. Once every 10 years, a person jumps down the 20 meters to commit suicide. My hometown was used as part of the Underground Railroad, as it is located right on the river. There's a legend that a woman was escaping slavery with her 2 children on a completely dark night. She had gone into the river and was close to the middle. The slave owners were close behind with dogs. Her baby started to cry, and fearing being caught, she did the only thing she could think of, which was drowning the baby. So the legend is that on a completely dark night with no moon, if you're by the river, you can hear a baby crying for its mother. Grew up in Yucaipa, California. The local legend of note, copied and pasted, locals say that a young woman wearing a piercing red dress can be seen walking down Pendleton Road. The street is uneven, filled with potholes, tall trees, and darkness. Legend says in the 1950s, the woman was on her way to an event, totaled her vehicle, she was critically injured. With no one around, all alone, and no one in sight to help, the woman dragged herself out of her vehicle and crawled to her untimely death. They say police found the woman's body half a mile away from the totaled vehicle on Pendleton Road. Reports of feeling uneasy, disembodied voices, being watched, and even being touched have been claimed by numerous locals who have walked through or driven down Pendleton Road. Well, that's a terribly sad and frightening story, so I guess that could freak people out down by the river. Kids at my now high school in the 80s all went swimming in the same creek all the time, as it was a popular hangout spot. At the time, a chemical plant nearby had been dumping waste in the creek that the high school kids would swim in. Years later, every kid that swam in that died from brain cancer at a relatively young age, 40s. Nobody ever talks about it, and I only found out about it last year. My city has the story of Fiere Marguerite, proud Margaret. Long story short, it's medieval times, and Margaret is working as a servant in an inn. A band of robbers kill the family owning the inn and take her outside the city center to R her and kill her. After they're done R-ing her, they throw her body in the local river. Instead of sinking, her body floats upstream, carried by fish and engulfed in a yellow light, back into the city center. By this miracle, the robber gang gets caught. The Duke of Brabant is a witness of this miracle, as you know. They built a chapel in her honor, etc. Pilgrimages. There's a statue of her naked body next to the Tigel, the local river, not far from my home. There was an old folks' home in the early 1990s where the woman owner would get power of attorney and starve them to death, keeping their assets. She was run out of town. Every restaurant that went into that building after failed miserably. In my town, we have an urban legend about a deformed humanoid that's always on all fours. One night I decided to go out with a friend to go to another friend's house, and we're both 100% sure I saw something like it. We walked near a lamppost, and I turned around to see how far the gap between me and my friend is. That's when I saw something crawling. I instantly thought it was a dog, so I told my friend to turn around and attract the dog. He saw it too and went over there, and I waited for 5 seconds, and he came running out of the dark end past me. I kept looking into the dark, and I saw a pale, obese figure crawling toward me with extreme speed. Its eyes were closed and its mouth was wide open, making smothered, loud breathing noises. I ran after my friend, and when we arrived at our other friend's house, I instantly laid down and slept. Pretty creepy experience for me. Our most famous is probably the Bunny Man Bridge. The legend goes that in 1904, a man was institutionalized after murdering his entire family with an axe. The man escaped, and people in the area would come across skinned rabbits, gnawed on and hung from trees by the Colchester overpass. A search party found him, but before they could arrest him, he was killed by a passing train crossing the overpass. The story continued in 1970. A man believed to be wearing a rabbit costume and carrying an axe attacked a couple driving through Fairfax County in the middle of the night, screaming at them as they sped away. 10 days later, a security guard in the area spotted a man in a rabbit suit attacking a post with an axe. He noticed the guard and yelled at him to get off his property or he'd chop off his head. The man was never apprehended. Now, every year after, when Halloween gets closer, locals find more skinned, suspended rabbits, and cars traveling that road report a man in a rabbit costume approaching them with an axe. The White Thing is a Bigfoot-like creature who allegedly lives around my area. I've known 6 people personally who have seen it, every one of them being totally level-headed people, and there are dozens of others who have shared their experiences online. The descriptions I've heard of it were a malnourished-looking legs, pale gray skin falling off like rags, horns like Pan from Pan's Labyrinth, glowing, giant, was able to simply step over my friend's fence, winged. One of my friends claimed it flew over her car late one night, and that it was able to walk effortlessly across the treetops and or power line. Bunny Man Bridge. I've read that one before, I like it, and, minus the whole murder stuff, I like that the locals keep the tradition alive. In my hometown, there were 3 two-story buildings built tight together. The one on the end, as on a street corner, it contained the local newspaper downstairs, and the owner of the movie theater lived upstairs with his wife and 4 children, 2 boys, 2 girls. The center one had the drugstore, and a young couple named Matt and Mary lived upstairs. The third one was the 5 and 10 cent store, and the owners of it lived upstairs. March 28, 1928. Matt and Mary threw a party. This was during Prohibition. Bootlegged booze was likely involved. A winter storm started that night. The party broke up early, and Mary's friends stayed to help her clean up. Sorry, I don't remember her name. Sometime later, a fire of undetermined origin, fire investigation was not as advanced back then, started in the newspaper office. The owner of the theater was out of town on business, so just his wife and kids were home. They were trapped upstairs. They yelled for help, but were not heard right away because of the wind. When they were brought out, they only rescued the wife and girls. Matt was brought out, but Mary and her friend were not. Matt was taken across the street to his sister's supper club. He recovered, but was incoherent for several days, leading to speculation he may have been drugged. The owners of the 5 and dime store got out with just the clogs on their back. In the day after the fire, the bodies of the 2 boys were found, but Mary and her friend were not. The theater owner's wife and daughters eventually died of their injuries. A coroner's inquest was held, but no determination of the origin of the fire or the whereabouts of Mary and her friend were made. Next came the stock market crash and the Depression. People in my little rural town had bigger problems. As the Depression faded and war clouds were on the horizon, the owner of the local hardware store went to Chicago to look for new inventory sources and do some Christmas shopping. He claimed to have seen Mary and talked to her on the street. My father's brother-in-law, who attended high school with them, claimed to have delivered firewood to them in Springfield, Oregon in the late 80s. We have a couple of ghosts. Boston, England. The Grey Lady. Supposedly, if you go to the local church at night and speak her name whilst walking around the tower, she will appear. Many a brave young person has tried it. Supposedly, she jumped off the tower with her baby. My mom claims she saw her once. The Monk of Father Michael. There's a local theater and arts center that used to be part of a monastery during medieval times. The art center is built on what used to be the kitchen and dining area. The monk supposedly haunts the backstage area and will steal any sharp knives that are left around. The story goes he murdered a fellow monk and then himself. I was part of an amateur troupe for years and never saw him, but I will say it felt really creepy backstage late at night. Finally, there is Black Shook, who is not from Boston but is a demonic dog that supposedly haunts the local area. I've heard quite a few stories about people seeing him. It's not an urban, but it's a freaking scary AF. There's a house many believed is buried on the Turkish tombs. The first family that moved there lost their unborn child and killed each other. The second guy who moved was a priest. He blessed the house, but he went missing. There was like 4 more families that lived there, but most of them are dead. The house is in Bulgaria, in a village called Mushachevo. These are all true. I was there for the last 2. We have mudflats in my city that is surrounded by mountains and the inlet. Mudflats are dangerous because they're kind of like a sinking sand. If you go out on them, when they're wet enough, they'll suck you in a little bit and you'll be stuck. The area has some of the highest tides in the world, with the tide rising at 6 inches per minute. In the 70s, a woman was out walking near Beluga Point, whale watching spot, and she got stuck. Someone saw her and ran to the nearest emergency phone to call 911 because the tide was going to come in soon. A helicopter came to rescue her. They had a rope tied around her waist and tried to lift her out as the tide rolled in. They were unsuccessful and ripped her body in half. A few years after opening the mall downtown, a man was killed in an elevator in JCPenney's. It got stuck between floors, and when he tried to get out by prying open the doors, it started working again and also chopped his body in half. When I was 7, a teenager killed themselves at the mall by jumping from the food court on the top floor. The mall was designed so you could see the bottom floor from the top, so she just jumped and made it straight down without any obstacles. They've changed the layout of the food court since then. A little girl got her hands mangled by the escalators in JCPenney. A loose piece of clothing got stuck in there, and she tried to pull it out. The escalator kept going after basically eating her fingers. When first responders came to treat her and put her in the ambulance, she was heard saying, "I'm sorry for ruining the clothing article, Mommy." And yes, all those happened at the same damn mall. About 25 minutes from where I live, there are 2 places that are deeply shrouded with tons of stories. The first is Crybaby Bridge, and the second is Dead Man's Curve. Crybaby Bridge supposedly is the final resting place of a young mother who got killed in an accident. Supposedly her baby was thrown from the car and never found. The legend goes that if you stand on the bridge today, you can hear a baby crying. Dead Man's Curve is a road with a very sharp turn, and many people have died on it. The curve turns left, right, in front of a huge ravine. I visited both places in the middle of the night, and there's a genuine spooky feeling when you go. We have the old railway tunnel running underneath the town. It's always locked from both ends, and has solid, unbroken walls all the way along. There's movement in the shadows that nobody can tell you the reason for, or maybe they won't. There's graffiti in there that changes between the times when I walk past it. Somehow, there are signs of life and no signs of entry. I've seen years' worth of undisrupted rust on the padlocks and fresh footprints heading out of the tunnel.